All right. We're returning to the cloud of unknowing, and we are on chapter 23. Gosh, too many more iterations of these Roman numerals. I'm not going to be able to know what chapter we're on. Right now, we're on chapter 23, and the little, uh, like what do you call these things? Does these things have a name? They must, where they write these little blurbs at the beginning of the chapter, sort of encapsulating the content of the chapter. Anybody know what those are called? All right, there's your homework. All right, well, his little intro here says it is God's will spiritually to provide and answer for those who have no desire to provide and answer for themselves because of their preoccupation with his love. I had to read this several times through to get his idea. What is he saying here? And my conclusion is what he's saying here is that it is God's will to spiritually provide all that you need when you are lost in your love for him through your faith in that grace. Right? And so basically it's God will the more you're willing to surrender, the more the willing the divine is to take responsibility for you. Right? And so you surrender and surrender and surrender, and Mother takes up more and more of the responsibility. If you've got the faith to surrender, knowing that divine grace has you covered, your faith in God's love allows you to do that. And he goes on and starts. He says, truly then, if we are ready to conform our love and our living, insofar as is possible for us by grace and by direction, to the love and the living of Mary, there is no doubt that he shall answer now for us spiritually in the same way, every day, in the hearts of all those that either speak or think against us. And not but that, but there will always be someone to think or speak something against us, as long as we live this life of travail, even as they did against Mary. But I think, but I say that if we pay no more heed to what they say or think, and do not give up this hidden ghostly work because of their words or their thoughts, any more than she did, our Lord, I say, will answer them in spirit, as long as all is well with them who so think and speak, to such effect that within a few days they will be ashamed of their words and their thoughts. This is always a very interesting thing to me that Christians, all Christian texts, they love they love being the victim. I don't know if that's nice for me to say, but I can't look around it. It's like they're always concerned about, being abused and others calling them names and others working against them and this and that. And we're going to stand up and be strong no matter what people say about us and no matter what people do against us. But it's troubling though, that's that's always the case because no matter what situation they're in, it's always the fault of someone else. It's that victim card, and I don't know. I don't know why it's there, and I don't know why it's part of the psyche of modern Christianity, this victimhood. And so, but he's just saying there, that that keep going, no matter what people say about you and about spiritual life, no matter how they treat you, you just keep going forward. You just keep going forward, and the Lord will take care of you, and eventually people will come around, is what this paragraph is saying. Eventually people will come around and feel bad for mistreating you, and love will win. So that's the worthy message there. Love will win. That's where we'll take it, right? Because everybody has to deal with this. Anybody who's trying to live a dharmic life is going to take some slack for it at some point from someone somewhere, right? And in that, we just keep going forward. That's all. We're not victims. We don't align with, we don't obey other people's thoughts and desires for our life. We stick to our convictions and to our love of the divine, and we go forward. That's all. It doesn't have to be a big, huge thing like this. Just as he will answer for us in this way in spirit, so he will direct other men in spirit to provide us with all that is necessary for this life, such as food and clothes and everything else. When he sees that we refuse to leave off the work of his love to busy ourselves about those things. I say this in refutation to their error, who maintain that it is not lawful for men to devote themselves to the service of God in the contemplative life, unless they are assured beforehand of having what is necessary for the body. Right. So this is interesting. He's saying that there was an understanding at one time, and it's not interesting because I was up there at Holy Cross, right, which is an Episcopalian Benedictine monastery up in West Park, New York, and I was interested to find out that in the Episcopalian Church they have monks and nuns. They also have congregations that believe that monasticism is sinful, that monasticism is illegal according to the scripture, and which is very interesting because the tradition I grew up in, the Church of Christ, also believes that a monastic life is sinful. They believe that everybody should get married and have children, and that's the way of being dharmic in this world. A very interesting idea, right? And so he's just bringing that here. He's saying what's interesting, very interesting in the way that he says it here, because there's another promise here, and that's that God takes care of those who trust in him, right? Those that put their faith in the beloved, he takes care of them. And so he's saying that here at the beginning, but it's interesting that they don't just have God take care of you, they have God directing people to take care of you, which I find just a wee bit fascinating and a wee bit weird. He says, just as he will answer for us in this way in spirit, so he will direct other men in spirit to provide us with all that is necessary for this life, such as food and clothes and everything else. And when he sees that we refuse to leave off the work of his love to busy ourselves about those things, I say this in refutation of their error, who maintain that it is not lawful for men to devote themselves to the service of God in the contemplative life, unless they are assured beforehand of having what is necessary for the body. Right? So this idea of becoming a monk and becoming dependent on society to support you, but through charity, that is a non-dharmic way of living. And the dharmic way to do it is save up all your money first to make sure that you can pay your bills, and then you can renounce the world. Which is another way of doing it, I suppose. But definitely, I don't think that God backs this up, just because I know that as a monk that the beloved has blessed me with all of my needs through the love of the devotees, and not by any force, not by any request even. It's love doing what love does, holding each other up and taking care of each other. He goes on and says, for they say that God sends the cow, but not by the horn. Now they are wrong to say this of God, as they well know. For if you, whoever you are, have been sincerely converted from the world to God, you must trust steadfastly that God will give you, without your attending to it, one of two things, either an abundance of what is necessary, or strength in body and spiritual patience to put up with the lack of them. Right? What then does it matter which of these two a man has? For true contemplatives, it is all the same. And whoever is doubtful of this, either the devil is in his heart and robs him of his faith, or else he is not as truly converted to God as he should be. No matter how clever or holy the reasons which he puts up against it, whoever he may be. All right, so he's just challenging that whole notion. He's just challenging that whole notion that you have to save up and pay your own bills in order to become a monk, or that it's non-dharmic to throw yourself at the mercy of God to take care of you, because you simply cannot gather any interest in anything but the divine, And so he's just challenging that notion. He's saying, of course, how could that be? As true contemplatives, God, we know that God gives us one of two things. Either he gives us everything that we need to live our life in faith, or he provides us with all the inner strength and tenacity that we need to do the same thing, even if he's not going to provide all that we need, right? And so he'll give you one of the two. He'll give you the stamina to survive the tough time that he's going to put you through for whatever reason, or he won't put you through the tough time. He'll give you all the food and clothing and shelter that you need, like that. So he's saying, to the mystic, to the contemplative, he doesn't care which one it is, because his is God, right? His is God is all that he's looking for. He doesn't care about all this other stuff, dharmic, non-dharmic, this, that, the other. He's God and God alone. Run one eye, one path straight forward. So you who set yourself to be a contemplative, as Mary was, choose rather to be humbled under the wonderful height and worthiness of God, which is perfect, rather than under your own wretchedness, which is imperfect. That is to say, take care that you make the worthiness of God the object of your special contemplation, rather than your own wretchedness. For they who are perfectly humble shall never lack anything, neither corporal nor spiritual. The reason is that they have God, in whom is all abundance. Whoever has him, indeed, as this book says, needs nothing else in this life. And so this is a very positive thing that he's saying here. Be humble because of the greatness of God. Don't be humble because of your own wretchedness. Right? And this is something that we've been talking about for a while because of this idea. It's terribly unhealthy to refer to ourselves as sinners or as wretches, as horrors along those lines, because that's what we become. If you identify with that, define yourself as that, what choice do you have but to be that? Right? And so, as Vedantins, what we're saying, and he's saying it now too here, which is very nice, that we don't focus on our unworthiness, we don't focus on our weakness, we don't focus on our wretchedness, we focus on God, right? The beloved. And that love that God has for us is our inspiration, right? We're not worried that we don't love him back in the same amount. What we do is we continue to think of him and to be in that presence, and our own love is increased. Our own love is lifted up. We become like him through our association and constant remembrance of that divine presence, right? And so he says, reach your humility that way, by constantly thinking of God and being in the presence of such beauty, such greatness, such sweetness, and allow that to make you a humble person. As you contrast your life with that perfection and find your inspiration to always push higher, to go farther, to do more. Out of inspiration again, not out of hunger, need, or thirst, or force, but out of inspiration, out of the beautiful presence. It's like what I tell people. If you marry a perfect person who's always supportive of you, always loving you, always taking care of your needs, always forgiving, always lifting up, you're not going to take advantage of them. That's a very unnatural thing to do. And yet that's always the story we hear, that if God gave us all of this love and it was all grace and we don't have to do anything, then we're going to take advantage of him and become horrible wretches and kill and rape everybody in the world. Right? It's like that's the line. It's like I've seen so many videos of conversations with it's usually Christians and atheists, where Christians are constantly telling the atheists that without God, all of us would be out there raping and pillaging, the world. That it's only because of our fear of God that we live upright lives, which that is so utterly faithless, because we are not animals in that sense. We have the image of God within. And that image of God, it inspires us to be loving, kind, careful people. It is Satchitananda. Satchitananda is not going to bust out of the farm and start living a life of vice in response to the beauty of the divine. That's just not, it's not even possible, right? So we see ourselves as married to the divine, as it were, and God is that perfect husband, that perfect wife, that perfect partner, right? Always hopeful, always helpful toward us. And we use that strength. We bask in that strength, right? Because we know God's faithfulness toward us. And we don't worry about our faults because God's not worried about our faults, right? What we're worried about is manifesting love as purely and as freely and as clearly as we can. And all of our efforts are in that direction. And through that grace, God lifts us up. God gives us that ability to do that so that we don't have to get caught in our self-sorrow, so that we don't have to get caught in our depressions and our weaknesses and our and suffer through our inability to transcend. Right? God is the antithesis to that. It is that love of God that gives us permission to set down our karma, our load of karma. It's the forgiveness that God gives us that allows us to not worry about our karma, so that our karma lessens, so that we're not driven by it, right? It's because of that grace that we become whole, right? By realizing our true nature, realizing that we are built, created, manifested in a direct image of the beloved. And that's what we are. And when we return to that, we give up the name. We give up our name. We give up our desires, our body mind manipulations, right? We resign them, not because they're sinful, not because we have to, not because blah, 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 but because they're unreal. And they are not an expression of our true nature, our true self, right? Because they lie to us as body mind, making us think that we're temporary, right? That we live behind an expiration date. They make us feel like we're small, we're not a part of the whole, we're separate, and we're in constant need. You know, that's what it is to live in ego self, right? Ego space. But that's not our true nature. And so that's why we work at transcending by understanding our nature is outside of time, right? That it's not a body, it doesn't manifest, and it's free. It doesn't have a desire. It's absolutely free. And so we work at seeing that. We work at knowing that and surrendering into it by studying our inner world, our inner life, so that we can see the truth of that statement and live truthfully and faithfully to our nature, which is God, which is that image of God, right? Satchitananda within us. Yeah, so that's what he's telling us. And so by thinking of God, right? For they who are perfectly humble shall never lack anything, neither corporal nor spiritual. Why? Because they have God, in whom is all abundance. Whoever has him, indeed, as this book says, needs nothing else in this life. That's the whole point right there, right? That we get the presence of God. We get to get in touch with this divine love. And through our practice, we see its reality, right? Because we slowly remove the misunderstandings and the distractions from ourself. We slowly remove this pill of me and mind from our psyche, and little by little, by letting go of those things, the reality begins to manifest. Right, the light starts to come through, and we realize that we have God within us, this image planted there, and that it's constantly emanating a divine love for us. It's constantly emanating a deep wisdom within us. And it's constantly emanating presence, this holiness, this sacredness of being. Right? And when we get in touch with that, that becomes our experience of living. And through that experience of living, it becomes our experience of action, which means our actions are driven by this love, by this unselfishness, by this need, by our nature to love, to care. Chapter 24. The nature of charity, it is subtly and perfectly contained in the exercise described in this book. Okay, so the nature of charity, he's saying, is fully described in this. And that nature of charity, it's that nature of forgiveness, that nature of grace, right? And this practice that he's talking about is sitting in the presence, right? And it's by sitting in the presence that, one, we become aware of our need for grace, right? Because you're sitting in the presence of perfection, right? You're sitting in the presence of a perfect lover. And if you're sitting in the presence of a perfect anything, it's going to make you aware of your imperfection in that same thing. You're going to be like, oh my God, this guy is so good looking. And here I have to stand next to him looking like a frog, right? So that's the feeling. But then when we see the magnanimous character of this person and realize that they are in relationship with us, right? And that they're not lording their greatness over us at all, but have dedicated it to our well-being, to our growth, and to our inspiration, then that relationship begins, then that inspiration begins. We have said that humility is subtly and perfectly contained in this little blind impulse of love, as it beats upon this dark cloud of unknowing, with all other things put down and forgotten. Right? The same is to be understood of all the other virtues, and particularly of charity. Right? So what's he saying? We have said that humility is subtly and perfectly contained in this little blind impulse of love, right? As it beats upon this dark cloud of unknowing. He's saying that we feel this inspiration of God's love for us as we press through this cloud of ignorance, this cloud of egoism, in our constant and steady attempt to touch the divine, right? To put down, the same is to be understood of all the other virtues, and particularly of charity, right? That all of this comes to us through this search of love for love, this love of love for its own sake. We are to understand that charity means nothing else than the love of God for himself above all creatures, and the love of man equal to the love of yourself for God's sake. So we're to understand that charity means nothing more than the love of God for himself, So it's a pure love for pure love. That's the highest ideal. It's love without any reason. It simply exists because it exists, and it loves because that is what its nature is. It loves, right? So it is this love for himself, which that is not just a body loving a body, right? It's God loving us, but loving us as himself, because what does he love in us? That which is lovable. And what is lovable in us? It's the image of himself or herself that she placed within us. That is why we're lovable. We're not lovable because of our behavior, because of our education, because of our self-control, because of our virtue. We are lovable because God has placed herself within us. And by default, God loves us, right? That's why there is no judgment. It's because God looks through all of the other stuff and sees that divine potential within us and lives to see it expressed, lives to see it successful in its manifestation in our lives. It is very obvious that in this exercise, God is loved for himself above all creatures. Right? So God is loved for himself. What does that mean? That means God is loved because God is lovable. God is loved for himself because he loves with no condition. He requires nothing of you. And so for someone to love you that way inspires love in return from you. That's where love is born. That's why love and unity are synonyms. As we become one, we unite. In what? In love. That's what Jesus' prayer in Matthew 17, I think, when his last prayer on the planet was God, he was praying to the Father. So, Father, make them one in me as I am one in you, and may the cord of love bind us forever into that unity. Right? So that's Jesus' final prayer, is that love will mature in all of us and bring us into a beautiful oneness of harmony, right? That we will see the divine image in each other and live accordingly and love accordingly. It is very obvious that in this exercise, God is loved for himself above all creatures. For as was said before, the essence of this exercise is nothing else but a simple and direct reaching out to God for himself. Right? So this exercise he keeps talking about is this contemplative repetition of the name, sitting in the presence. That's what the whole book is about, this cloud of unknowing, pushing through that cloud of unknowing to touch God. I call it a simple reaching out because in this exercise, the perfect apprentice does not ask to be released from pain or for his reward to be increased. In a word, he asks for nothing but God himself. So much so that he takes no account or regard of whether he is in pain or in joy, but only that the will of him whom he loves be fulfilled. Right? This is singing the praises of love for its own sake. We don't love with any expectations. And this is very important because this is how love can destroy a relationship, imperfect love. Right? If I love you and you love me, and after a while I just feel like, hey, I'm loving you more than you're loving me, right? Then I wasn't really loving you. I was kind of playing merchant with you, right? I was only loving you as long as you loved me back, or loving you as long as you treat me in a certain way, or loving you as long as you return my phone calls and invite me to your dinner parties, right? That's not love. That is mercantile. That's shopkeeping. That's what Vivekananda says. He says human love, the love we experience in this world most of the time, is not love. It's shopkeeping, right? And so to love God for God's own sake is the love that God has for us. He loves us for his own sake because he's loving love for love's sake. Love is loved because it is lovable. And so with us, we are loved because we are lovable, and we love because we are love itself. We are that nature. Right? So much so that he takes no account of regard or whether he is in pain or in joy, but only that the will of him whom he loves be fulfilled. It is evident then that in this exercise, God is perfectly loved for himself and above all creatures, right? So it's that understanding of the one without a second. Everything is manifested out of that one divine. Right? And so that we see that this love is for that unity, for that one without a second above all things. He says, in this exercise, the perfect worker will not permit his awareness of the holiest creature God ever made to have any share, right? So that just means that we're not taking refuge in multiple things. We're taking a refuge in God alone. That's all he's saying here. And that anybody out there who's doing this exercise will love God for God alone and not for any other reason, and won't love anything outside of the divine, right? Because the divine is love, and that is where all love comes from, where all love manifests from. So to love things outside of that, right? Where will you get the love outside of love to love something outside of love? I don't know why this point needs to be made, but here it is. Experience shows that in this exercise, the lower branch of charity, that for your fellow Christian, is a truly and perfectly fulfilled. Okay, what's that? Experience shows that in this exercise, the lower branch of charity, that for your fellow Christian, is truly and perfectly fulfilled. Okay, all right. So love of your brothers and sisters is perfectly fulfilled in this love of love as well. And again, it comes back to that divine image within. For the perfect worker here has no special regard for any individual, whether he is a kinsman or a stranger, friend or a foe. That is the monastic ideal. You know, the monastic ideal is to love everyone as your own. Everyone becomes your mother, everyone becomes your brother, everyone becomes your son or your daughter or your sister, right? And to have that equanimity of vision, right? Because all of this disparity of vision comes from lust and greed, right? It's because of lust and greed that we decide whether people are ugly or beautiful. It's because of lust and greed that we decide whether somebody's rich or poor, whether somebody is sexy or hideous, whether someone's fat or thin, right? All of the judgments come from lust and greed. We start looking at each other and we start evaluating each other according to lust and greed. And that's the world that we live in. It's the world of pain and suffering. But for these spiritual few who are fighting to see their own true nature and happen to discover it, that we don't have that lust and greed, that body mind, right? That's what lust and greed are. They are what the body mind seeks for itself, because it's small and it's limited, and so it seeks for its expansion and its power, right? But the self who knows the self knows that he is infinite, that he's not material, that he will never die. So all of those threats are gone, are eliminated, right? And so he can love everybody equally without any expectation of getting any particular return from them, because he needs nothing from them. He is content within herself, within himself. For he considers all men alike as his kinsmen, and no man as a stranger to him. He considers all men his friends, and none his foes. So much so that he considers all these that cause him pain and do him mischief in this life to be his very special friends, and he considers that he is being moved to wish them as good as he would to the dearest friend he has. Right? So we don't see each other as kinmen and whatnot, because we already see everybody as our kin. We see and emphasize that we are a family of one, right? That all of us are united together. And we don't judge each other according to other attributes or separate others from ourselves in that sense. And so through this, seeing the image of God in one another, we develop what is here. We develop a fond regard for everyone, so that we're always just wishing the best. It's what Holy Mother says. Make the whole world your own. No one is a stranger, my child. Right? And so just approach everybody as family. Everybody is kin. And we see a lot of great examples about how that works. Holy Mother, she was crossing the field of dacoits, the field of robbers at night, remember? And she met those two dacoits coming toward her, and she approached them as if they were her family and surrendered herself to them and told them she was in such great danger. Would they protect her? Can I walk with you? And they took her on as her child. They couldn't abuse her, right? Because of that trust. We read that story about Peace Pilgrim last week, where she got picked up by a guy in a car at night out in the desert. And he himself says that he had picked her up with bad intentions. But he said that the way that she got in the car and she sat down so trusting and so sweetly, curled up in the seat next to him and put her head on his shoulder to fall asleep, he says, I couldn't violate that kind of trust. I couldn't violate that kind of trust. So he took care of her and became a disciple of hers, became a student of hers. You see, so if we can sincerely and earnestly love people like this, not manipulate people with this, but truly love them like this, it changes the course of karma. It touches people to love them like this and to be this sweet and open with them. And this is how the world changes. Right? Be the change that you want to see in the world, because if you change it in yourself, it will change in your world. Right? I remember my broken story, my my age-old story. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I found everybody very distant, very kind of haughty and cold. And then I decided that I would start practicing seeing God in people's faces when I was walking, and that when I made eye contact with them, I would address Thakur with a sweet smile or a nice nod of my head or a hello or whatnot. And I began practicing that. And after about 2 weeks, I started realizing that people started talking to me. I realized that people started smiling at me, and I realized that people had been haughty toward me because I was putting off a standoffish judgment by expecting them to be haughty, right? And so if we live these ways, if we take on these principles, the world is different. The world changes because of our change within ourselves. And so we want to have no strangers, to see everyone as our own, and to love each and every one as our dearest friend. Right? Imagine what it will be like to walk around a world like that, where you're just accustomed to being trusting and open and loving everyone as your dearest friend. right? So that person calls your name on the street, or that homeless guy gets your attention. You don't just look the other way and walk quickly the other direction. You look at them and you're like, yes, hi, what can I do for you? Just like you've always known them, you've always intended to help them, you always loved them, and you just go and get busy with it, right? And finish that and move on down the street, and somebody else says something to you, and you're just immediately completely theirs, completely available to them to hear, to share their experience. And then you move on, and mother brings the next one for you, right? And you just go on loving after the other, one after the other, unstoppable. Chapter 25. During the time of this exercise, the perfect soul has no special regard for any particular person in this life. So another statement of the same that we've been talking about, that we don't see each other as individuals. We see each other as manifestations of God, manifestations of our divine beloved. It says, during this exercise, I say that he must not have any special regard for anyone alive, whether friend or foe, kinsman or stranger. For if this exercise is to be done perfectly, that cannot be, as it is when all things under God are entirely forgotten, which is fitting for the exercise. But I avow that he shall be made so virtuous and so charitable by reason of this exercise, that when he comes down to frequent the company or to pray for his fellow Christians, he will say, his will shall be directed as particularly towards his foe as towards his friend, towards the stranger as toward his kinsman. I do not mean that he comes down from this work completely, but that cannot be without great sin, but that the height of the contemplative exercise, which he must do sometimes when it is expedient and necessary according to the demands of charity. Yes, and sometimes his will must be directed rather to his foe than to his friend. Right? He's saying just as a general rule, we carry on this idea of seeing our beloved in everyone. And he says, yes, there's going to be exceptions, and yes, there's going to be times when there's tiger gods that should be saluted from a distance, right? You don't put yourself into abusive situations, right? But you never stop loving and respecting. So yes, a person isn't safe for you to go up and be near them because they're misogynistic, they're homophobic, they're mean, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. What that means is that you salute them from a distance, right? Jesus, Ramakrishna says, there is the tiger god. You don't run up to the tiger and give him a hug in the woods because you love him, right? You respect him, but you respect him and salute him from a distance. So you love him from a distance. You take care of yourself in front of toxic people, but you still continue to love them. You just do it from a distance, right? You take care of yourself. And within that obstacle, you work to overcome it in any creative ways you can. Find some way to serve that person from a distance, to do well to them. It must be said, however, that in this exercise, he has not the leisure to consider who is his friend or foe, who is his kinsman or stranger. I am not saying that he is not to feel sometimes, and even often, that in his affection he is more drawn to one or two or three than to all the rest. That is lawful, and for many reasons, and as charity demands. Such special affection Christ our Lord had for John and Mary and Peter before many others. What I say that is in the same time of this exercise, all alike should be dear to him, because he will experience no cause for affection except God alone, right? So our only cause for affection is the love of God that's filling up in us and pouring over. That's why we practice. We have to be filled with the love of God, which means we have to know God's love for us in a personal and immediate way. It can't be just a matter of faith. That's why we have to do this practice where we go and we sit in the presence. And we feel that need for grace because we feel incomplete. We feel like we need to fix something. And that's what makes us think about grace. That's what makes us accept grace. That's what makes us ponder grace. And once we accept that grace, then God can pour that love directly into us. We enjoy that bliss. We feel that warmth. We feel that happiness in the heart. We feel that life energy, that prana flowing in us. The presence, existence becomes electrical in us. And then we live that way. And what does that mean? It means we walk into a room, we're smiling, we're excited to be there, we're positive about it, right? It means we show up at work and we're ready to go, right? It's that thing in the morning of preparing yourself for the day. Again, I remind you that it's wonderful to sit there on the edge of your bed in the morning and just understand everything you're touching is God. Everything you're breathing is God, right? And everything around you is of the nature of love and wisdom and being. And so you just sit there and you walk yourself into the day in the proper way. You don't wake up thinking, oh, I got to do this. And oh my God, I got to do that. And I've got to hurry up at 10. I've got this and then I've got that. No, 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 no. That all comes one at a time as those times come in the day. You wake up to the beloved. You wake up remembering the joy of this life, the joy of being, the potential of what this day holds as possible for you, the things you could see, the things you could understand. If you lived a day of faith, if you lived a day of love and service. And so you set yourself up in that way. And then you begin singing a song or chanting the name or doing your mantra, right? And you go and you wash the body like you're getting ready to wash the image in the shrine for worship, right? You fix your hair, you brush the Lord's teeth, right? You wash the Lord's face. You put the Lord's orange t-shirt, his favorite orange t-shirt on him, right? And you'd walk him to the shrine and you sit him down and you use his mind to think about love. And you sit there in the shrine, enjoy that time. You laugh a little bit. Maybe you offer a flower. Maybe lay on the floor and sing a song, right? Enjoy the presence for a while. And then you get up and you go out to do it in the world. You walk out that door and you just keep the energy the same. Keep the song the same. No change of record, no change of background. You just walk out the door, still chanting the name of God, still smiling, still soaking yourself in love, still contemplating that love and that grace, right? Carrying that image squarely in the shrine of your heart. You sit in that profound space. For as all men were lost in Adam, and as all men who bear witness to their desire of salvation by good works are saved and shall be saved by the power of Christ's passion alone, a soul whose affection is perfectly extended in this exercise and thus united to God in spirit, not exactly in the same way, but as it were in the same way, does all that in it lies, as the experience of this exercise bears witness, to make all men as perfect in their work as it is itself. For just as when a limb of our body feels sore, all the other limbs are in pain and ill affected on that account, or when one limb is in good health and all the rest are likewise in good health, so it is spiritually with all the limbs of the Holy Church. For Christ is our head, and we are the limbs as long as we are in charity. Right. No, they're talking about the church in this sense, but there's really no need. It's the same paradigm. If you just talk about the fact that if we have Christ as our head, what does that mean? That means it is the spirit of Buddha, the spirit of Rama, the spirit of Jesus, the spirit of Ramakrishna that is inspiring all the movements of this body mind, right? That's Christ as the head, right? That Christ nature, which is that image of God. And so this is how we're put together. So the head, our true self, is a manifestation of God. And so our highest ideal is to be a whole, to be a whole through egoism, so that God can be clearly seen when someone looks in our eyes, right? So that God can be experienced when someone comes up and touches us. It speaks to us. And whoever desires to be a perfect disciple of our Lord is called upon to lift up his spirit and his spiritual exercise for the salvation of all his natural brothers and sisters, as our Lord lifted up his body on the cross. Right? So it becomes a reenactment of that same. Jesus lifted up his body on the cross, right? He made a sacrifice of himself for the welfare of others. And so that's what he's talking. This same love that builds up in us, that fills us up and spills out, lives to serve, to always hope, always trust, always believe, right? To never fail, to set out, right? And Jesus told his disciples, they will know you're my disciples by what? By your love. And Vivekananda says, you will know that you are spiritual by what? By your love. Well, love is the one most important thing. It's more important than any other creed, more important than any other doctrine, more important than any other dogma. Loving is the one most important thing. Not being right, not knowing the right things, but loving. Always, always loving. So the Lord is called upon to lift up his spirit in his spiritual exercise for the salvation of all his natural brothers and sisters, as our Lord lifted up his body on the cross. And how? Not for his friends and his kinfolk and for those who love him dearly, but in general. All right? So not for the particular, because of their relationship with your particular. Why? Because we are not particular in nature. We are general, right? We're not small. We're infinite. We're not one person, we're every person. We're not in this world is within us, right? So we love in general for all mankind without any special regard for one more than for another. For all those who desire to forsake sin and ask for mercy are to be saved through the power of his passion. What has been said of humility and charity is to be understood of all the other virtues, for they are all subtly contained in this little impulse of love mentioned before. Right? And so, really, what he's saying here is if we sit in the presence of God, all virtues are ours. If we contemplate Satchitananda and identify with it and know that to be our nature, then little by little that begins to define our manifestation. And we begin to manifest love for its own sake. We begin to manifest wisdom, and we begin to manifest presence, right? Uh, with folks, that very strong ability to be fully here and now that we always talk about. That's the only way love happens. The only way people change is through love. The only way you can teach somebody is through love. Argument, debate, worthless. You never change anybody with facts. We see that in the world today more than ever. People are changed by love alone. And so love them. Love them. And love yourself. Because if this love is not changing you, if the confidence in grace isn't giving you a particular strength in the presence, right? Then sit a little longer. That's all. Sit a little longer because it will. It's the power of the divine. It's inevitable. All right. Well, actually, it's a good time to stop. So we're going to stop there at chapter 26. Turn off the recording.